as it should be. There we go. And folks, can you do me a favor before we leave? Remind me. Hi, Kathy Miller, Willie. Remind me um,
To
to turn off the do not disturb on my phone, especially right now. Howie is in Cornwall, and I'll tell you all about it later. But I don't like being on do not disturb when he's on the road. Okay, now jumpins me in. Now let's talk about what's coming up. I don't know. Hi, baby. Hi, how's it going? I'm going to let people show up and say hello so that they're in chat, and then I can say hello. Uh, okay, good news, bad news. Bad news is most of this book is complete fiction. Okay. When Laura Ingalls actually went to Kansas Indian Territory, she was only 18 months old. So most of the story is from stories that she's heard about things that, and most of it's either stories she's heard or it's absolute fiction. Okay, yeah, she was a baby. She was a baby. So there is that. Much better. Stop spamming cat. See what I mean? So there's that. Good news is, for those of you who are not following on my other channels, I have ordered a new phone. Now, this one's cracked, but the phone I've ordered is specifically for taking calls when I'm live streaming. And why that little bugger? Briar borrowed my charger and my Bluetooth speaker last night, and he didn't bring them back up. Oh well. So, what's going to happen is in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have a new phone with a line just for live streaming, and you'll be able to call in and we'll be able to do it on the Bluetooth speaker just like a real show. Won't that be awesome? I think it is just to see an alternative of her in age 6 years. Absolutely. So let me say hi to everybody before we get a moving on here. Let's pop out my chat. Oh no, let's do participants first. Seashell, Carol McKinney, and you don't show up on for me to say hi and shout you out unless you've already commented. Okay, because that's how it says participants, because you participated in the chat. Seashell, Carol McKinney, Kathy Miller, Jean Phillips, hey, Magic Mike, the Nightbot, and Samoa, our Half Acre Homestead, Raf Jolie, Reading with Beverly Wolfe, again, Samoa, and Willie. Okay, so let's go to live chat. And please remember, not only has YouTube got some kind of digital moderator or they're trying some kind of new moderating program, but too many caps will get you times out. Okay? Too many emojis will get you timed out. All right? Hey, here's Johnny. It's been a while, Patricia Carson. All right, so let's start with, because that's going to make discussion also. Having a phone and a line to call in is going to make the discussion more interactive whenever we have a discussion, right? You'll be able to call in if I'm ranting or whatever the case may be, whether it's here, Cooking with Cannabis, or the other one. Just don't use it on Cooking with Cannabis to give me song requests, because I never seem to have the time for that. So where are we? All right. So there is a little brief kind of thing going on here as they leave Little House in the Big Woods. I got to change my glasses because I really, you know what? I've got all this eye jewelry, but I only have one pair of bifocals. I really, as soon as Howie's back to work and things are manageable again, I'm getting another pair. All right. Summer was over and Jack Frost came again. The leaves on the trees were all brightly colored. Carrie was old enough now to sleep in our trundle bed, and Mary and I slept in the attic with Susan, the cat, sleeping at the foot of the bed to keep our feet warm. Pa sold Suki the cow, and when I cried, he said we were going to Uncle Peter's to stay and could not take her. He said we could not take Wolf or Susan. Who's Wolf? Dog, eh? But Mrs. Peterson was coming to live in our house, and she would keep him. Then one day, Ma put our things in boxes. Pa loaded them into the wagon, and we all got in, and Pa drove a long time through the woods. The farther we went, the bigger the trees were and nearer together, until at last we came to Uncle Peter's. Uncle Peter lived in the big woods. His house was made of logs and stood in a little cleared place with great tall dark trees all around it. Now this is from this. Uncle Peter, Aunt Eliza, and the cousins Alice and Peter and Ella were glad to see us. Baby Edith was too small to know us, but she laughed at me and held out her little hands. They called her Dolly Varden because she had a pretty dress of calico that was called that. Mary and the cousins began going to school the next week. The log schoolhouse was only a little way down the road, and sometimes they would take me, drawing me over the snow on their sled. They took lunch in a bright tin pail and ate it with all the other children. Now listen, guys, I'm not going to read any farther. Do you know why? Because in this case, they're actually moving to Plum Creek, right? They're not moving to Indian Territory. And this is what it says about that. Dolly Varden, because she had a pretty dress of calico, that was called. Dolly Varden is a character from Charles Dickens' novel Barnaby Rudge, published in 1841. Dickens described her as the very pink and pattern of good looks, in a smart little cherry-colored mantle with a hood of the same, little straw-trimmed hat with cherry-colored ribbons, and worn the merest trifle on the side, just enough in short to make it the wickedest and most provoking headdress that ever malicious milliner devised. Now that was from Dickens. The character of Dolly Varden became the darling of popular culture on both sides of the Atlantic, inspiring songs, dances, paintings, and fashion. Women donned Dolly Varden straw hats and floral patterned dresses of cotton, silk, and linen. Her influence extended even to the big woods of Wisconsin. Ferguson, brief history. Okay, so we called it Making Pictures. In the Juvenile Pioneer Girl manuscript, Lane plays this game on Christmas Eve afternoon, where it is also, and when the Lane plays this game on Christmas Eve afternoon, where it also appears in Little House in the Big Woods. Wilder ended the scene in the novel with a variation of this line. They called these their pictures. Scarlet fever. See, this is going on. You know what? I'm really sorry, folks. I backed up. Okay. Sorry, I got the wrong spot. We were going to Uncle Peter's. In the opening chapter of Little House on the Prairie, the fictional Ingalls family loads up the wagon and leaves Wisconsin for Indian Territory. They do not stay with Uncle Peter, nor do they stay or travel with extended family when they move from Indian Territory to Minnesota, which is where On the Banks of Plum Creek begins. Sorry, I was reading the wrong spot. Even though the timeline and movements these novels depict are fictional, Wilder drew some details from this scene for Little House on the Prairie by eliminating the short stays with the extended family that occurred on both sides of the trip to Kansas. However, Wilder focused on the self-sufficiency of her fictional family rather than on the reality of her own personal history. Okay? You did live down the road from the cabin. Okay, so, I don't know, and I can't make any because I'm on here from our half-acre homestead. Uncle Peter, I believe, was Charles's brother, and actually, Aunt Eliza, or Uncle Peter's wife, was Caroline's sister. So those cousins were actually closer to being siblings. I'm not sure, but I know that there are two. Charles and one of his brothers married Caroline and one of her sisters. I do know that. All right, shall we get started? Now that we know that this is more fictional, and it's going to be fun discussing it when I get my phone. Now that we know this is more fictional, we can take it with a grain of salt. And remember, this is a story. Now, Plum Creek is probably going to be closer to the truth, right? Which is the next book. Chapter 1 on Little House on the Prairie, Going West. There's Little Red. Chapter 1, Going West. A long time ago, when all the grandfathers and grandmothers of today were little boys and girls, or very small babies, or perhaps not even born, Pa and Ma and Mary and Laura and baby Carrie left their little house in the big woods of Wisconsin. They drove away and left it lonely and empty in the clearing among the big trees, and they never saw that little house again. They were going to Indian country. Pa said there were too many people in the big woods now. Quite often, Laura heard the ringing thud of an axe that was not Pa's axe, or the echo of a shot that did not come from his gun. The path that went by the little house had become a road. Almost every day, Laura and Mary stopped their playing and stared in surprise at a wagon slowly creaking by on that road. One wagon every day. Oh my God. Please excuse me. My throat's really dry. Wild animals would not stay in a country where there were so many people. Pa did not like to stay either. He liked a country where the wild animals lived without being afraid. He liked to see the little fawns and their mothers looking at him from the shadowy woods, and the fat, lazy bears eating berries in the wild berry patches. In the long winter evenings, he talked to Ma about the Western country, trying to convince her. In the West, the land was level and there were no trees. The grass grew thick and high. The wild animals wandered and fed as though they were in a pasture that stretched farther than a man could see, and there were no settlers. Only Indians lived there. One day, in the very last of the winter, Pa said to Ma, "Seeing you don't object, I've decided to go see the West. I've had an offer for this place, and we can sell it now for as much as we're ever likely to get. Enough to give us a start in the new country." "Oh, Charles, must we go now?" Ma said. The weather was so cold and the snug house so comfortable. "If we're going this year, we must go now," Pa said. "We can't get across the Mississippi after the ice breaks." So Pa sold the little house. He sold the cow and calf. He made hickory bows and fastened them upright to the wagon box. Ma helped him stretch white canvas over them. In the thin dark before morning, Ma gently shook Mary and Laura till they got up. In the firelight and candlelight, she washed and combed them and dressed them warmly. Over their long red flannel underwear, she put wool petticoats and wool dresses and long wool stockings. She put their coats on them and their rabbit skin hoods and their red yarn mittens. Everything from the little house was in the wagon except the beds and tables and chairs. They did not need to take these because Pa could always make new ones. There was thin snow on the ground. The air was still cold and dark. The bare tree stood up against the frosty stars, but in the east the sky was pale. Through the gray woods came the lanterns but in the east the sky was pale, and through the gray woods came lanterns with wagons and horses bringing Grandpa and Grandma and aunts and uncles and cousins. Mary and Laura clung tight to their rag dolls and did not say anything. The cousins stood around and looked at them. Grandma and all the aunts hugged and kissed them and hugged and kissed them again, saying goodbye. Pa hung his wagon on the bows inside the canvas top, where he could reach it quickly from the seat. He hung his bullet pouch and powder horn beneath it. He laid the fiddle box carefully between pillows, where jolting would not hurt the fiddle. The uncles helped him hitch the horses to the wagon. All the cousins were told to kiss Mary and Laura, so they did. Pa picked up Mary and then Laura and set them on the bed in the back of the wagon. He helped Ma climb up to the wagon seat, and Grandma reached up and gave her baby Carrie. Pa swung up and sat beside Ma, and Jack the brindle bulldog went under the wagon. Now we know when they sold the house in the big woods. Their dog's name was Wolf, and he stayed behind. But I think they got another dog because we'll see later. So they all went away from the little log house. The shutters were over the windows, so the little house could not see them go. It stayed there inside the log fence, behind the two big oak trees that sat in the summertime, had made green roofs for Mary and Laura to play under. And that was the last of the little house. Pa promised when they came to the west, Laura should see a papoose. "What is a papoose?" she asked him, and he said, "A papoose is a little brown Indian baby." I wonder if they're going to rewrite this to make it politically correct. They drove a long way through the snowy woods till they came towards the town of Pepin. Mary and Laura had seen it once before, but it looked different now. The door of the store and the door of all the houses were shut. The stumps were covered with snow, and no little children were playing outdoors. Big cords of wood stood among the stumps. Only 2 or 3 men in boots and fur caps and bright plaid coats were to be seen. Ma and Laura and Mary ate bread and molasses in the wagon, and the horses ate corn from the nose bags. So unhealthy for them. While inside the store, Pa traded his furs for things they would need on the journey. They could not stay long in town because they must cross the lake that day. Now, I'm going to interrupt here because when they did leave to cross the lake, remember they were going to Uncle Peter's. Give me a second. All right, let me they were going to Uncle Peter's Okay, I'm sorry, but there was one point in here, and I don't know if it's in the footnotes or in the thing, that said when they crossed the lake, it was already slushy, and the horses' hooves splashed as they went down upon the lake. And Laura was afraid because all she could hear was the hooves splashing. And she was afraid that they were actually going into the water. And her mother basically said, lay down and be quiet. Right? The enormous lake stretched flat and smooth and white all the way to the edge of the gray sky. Wagon tracks went away across it so far that you could not see where they went. They ended in nothing at all. Pa drove the wagon out onto the ice, following those wagon tracks. The horses' hoofs clopped with a dull sound. The wagon wheels went crunching. The town grew smaller and smaller behind, till even the tall store was only a dot. All around the wagon there was nothing but empty, silent space. Laura didn't like it. But Pa was on the wagon seat and Jack was under the wagon. She knew that nothing could hurt her while Pa and Jack were there. At last the wagon was pulling up a slope of earth again, and there were trees. There was a little log house, two among the trees, so Laura felt better. Nobody lived in the little house. It was a place to camp in. It was a tiny house and strange, with a big fireplace and rough bunks against all the walls. But it was warm when Pa built a fire in the fireplace. That night, Mary and Laura and baby Carrie slept with Ma in a bed made on the floor before the fire, while Pa slept outside in the wagon to guard it and the horses. You're going to notice, because it's a story, you're going to notice some things that are going to pop in and out. For instance, Jack being with them on this journey, Jack didn't exist. Okay? They say that he went with them to Plum Creek, but Jack was Wolf, and Wolf never left the log house. So from this point on, Jack's just fiction, right? In the night, a strange noise wakened Laura. It sounded like a shot, but it was sharper and longer than a shot. Again and again, she heard it. Mary and Carrie were asleep, but Laura couldn't sleep until Ma's voice came softly through the dark. Go to sleep, Laura, Ma said. It's only the ice cracking. Next morning, Pa said, it's lucky we crossed yesterday, Carolyn. Remember I said the surface was slushy? Wouldn't wonder if the ice broke up today. We made a late crossing and we're lucky it didn't start breaking up while we were out in the middle of it. I thought about that yesterday, Charles, Ma replied gently. Laura hadn't thought about it before, but now she thought what would have happened if the ice had cracked under the wagon wheels and they had all gone down into the cold water in the middle of that vast lake. You're frightening somebody, Charles, Ma said, and Pa caught Laura up in a safe big hug. We're across the Mississippi, he said, hugging her joyously. How do you like that little half pint of sweet cider half drunk up? Do you like going out west where Indians live? Laura said she liked it, and she asked if they were in Indian country now. But they were not. They were in Minnesota. It was a long, long way to Indian territory. Almost every day the horses traveled as far as they could. Almost every night, Pa and Ma made camp in a new place. Sometimes they had to stay several days in one camp because a creek was in flood, and they couldn't cross till the water went down. They crossed too many creeks to count. They saw strange woods and hills and stranger country with no trees. They drove across rivers on long wooden bridges, and they came to one wide yellow river that had no bridge. That was the Missouri River. Pa drove onto a raft, and they all sat still in the wagon while the raft went away, swaying away from the safe land, and slowly crossed all that rolling, muddy, yellow water. After more days, they came to hills again. In a valley, the wagon got stuck fast in deep black mud. Rain poured down and thunder crashed and lightning flared. There was no place to make a camp and build a fire. Everything was damp and chill and miserable in the wagon, but they had to stay in it and eat cold bits of food. Next day, Pa found a place on a hillside where they stood camp. The rain had stopped, but they had to wait a week before the creek went down and the mud dried so that Pa could dig the wagon wheels out of it and go on. What made him go through a valley in the rain? Can anyone say flash flood? One day, while they were waiting, a tall, lean man came out of the woods riding a black pony. He and Pa talked a while and then went off into the woods together. And when they came back, both of them were riding black ponies. Pa had traded the tired brown horses for those ponies. They were beautiful little horses, and Pa said they were not really ponies, they were Western Mustangs. They were strong as mules and gentle as kittens, Pa said. They had large, soft, gentle eyes and long manes and tails, and slender legs and feet, much smaller and quicker than the feet of the horses in the big woods. When Laura asked their names, Pa said that she and Mary could name them. So Mary named one Pet, and Laura named the other Patty. When the creek's roar was not so loud and the road was drier, Pa dug the wagon out of the mud. He hitched Pet and Patty to it, and they all went on together. They had come in the covered wagon all the long way from the big woods of Wisconsin, across Minnesota and Iowa and Missouri, or Missouri, depends on where you live. All that long way, Jack had trotted under the wagon. Now they set out to go across Kansas. Kansas was an endless flat land covered with tall grass blowing in the wind. Day after day they traveled in Kansas and saw nothing but the rippling grass and the enormous sky. In a perfect circle, the sky curved down to the level land, and the wagon was in the circle's exact middle. All day long, Pet and Patty went forward, trotting and walking, trotting again, but they couldn't get out of the middle of that circle. When the sun went down, the circle was still around them, and the edge of the sky was pink. Then slowly the land became black. The wind made a lonely sound in the grass. The campfire was small and lost in so much space. But large stars hung from the sky, glittering so near that Laura felt she could almost touch them. Next day, the land was the same. The sky was the same. The circle did not change. Laura and Mary were tired of them all. There was nothing new to do and nothing new to look at. The bed was made in the back of the wagon and neatly covered with a gray blanket. Laura and Mary sat on it. The canvas sides of the wagon top were rolled up and tied so the prairie wind blew in. It whipped Laura's straight brown hair and Mary's golden curls every which way, and the strong light screwed up their eyelids. Sometimes a big jackrabbit bounded in big bounds away over the blowing grasses. Jack paid no attention. Poor Jack was tired too, and his paws were sore from traveling so far. The wagon kept on jolting. The canvas top snapped in the wind. 2 faint wheel tracks kept going away behind the wagon, always the same. Pa's back was hunched. The reins were loose in his hands. The wind blew his long brown beard. Ma sat straight and quiet, her hands folded in her lap. Baby Carrie slept in the nest among the soft bundles. Mary yawned, and Laura said, "Ma, can we get out and run behind the wagon? My legs are so tired." "No, Laura," Ma said. Can you say snakes? That's why Ma said no. "Aren't we going to camp pretty soon?" Laura asked. It seemed such a long time since noon, when they had eaten their lunch sitting on the clean grass in the shade of the wagon. Pa answered, "Not yet. It's too early to camp now." "I want to camp now. I'm so tired," Laura said. Then Ma said, "Laura." That was all, but it meant Laura must not complain. So she did not complain any more out loud, but she was still naughty inside. She sat and thought complaints to herself. Her legs ached, and the wind wouldn't stop blowing her hair. The grass waved and the wagon jolted, and nothing else happened for a long time. We're coming to a creek or river, Pa said. Girls, can you see those trees ahead? Laura stood up and held on to one of the wagon bows. Far ahead, she saw a low, dark smudge. That's trees, Pa said. You can tell by the shape of the shadows. In this country, trees mean water. That's where we'll camp tonight. So, see that why I say Laura? Okay, let me get my glasses on here. Complaining for no good reason. Absolutely. I'm not sure if I can read it to my children now that I know. Oh, honey, they're just stories. That's the whole point, okay? We grew up watching Little House on the Prairie on TV. Let me tell you something. Other than the names, some of the names, half of the names in here are fiction too, okay? But other than some of the names and some of the places, that Little House on the Prairie was almost entirely fiction. This is at least, this is fiction, but this at least is founded in stories that her parents told her. And the rest of the books are also, they were written for children. Therefore, they were made more understandable for children, more fiction. So yes, they're maybe based on her life, but these books are fiction. Take care. Hubby and I are shopping, so I have to say adieu. Take care, Furby. So that they survived and Laura lived to tell a fictional version of it. Absolutely. Absolutely. But the banks of Plum Creek, a lot of that was true, right? And then going out to De Smet, where the long winter and everything took place, that was all based in truth, right? So, I mean, we can only, that's why we have these books, and why Beth sent me, this is going to be, this is a lot of history on the long winter. So, I mean, we're all going to enjoy separating fact from fiction. This is where it gets good, right? We can't begin to understand the hardship of traveling in a wagon. Yeah, I can. I can understand it. And, pooey. You know what I mean? It was a lot. It was a lot. But we also know that Charles, when they crossed Lake Pepin, they were actually going to Plum Creek. But they did stay with family, and they stayed with extended family, and they hopped around all over the place. Charles was a jitterbug. He just could not stay still. It wasn't until Ma basically put her foot down in De Smet and said, no, this is it. The girls got to go to school. They've got to have some kind of society. You promised. We're staying here. And they did. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the first chapter. It was a long one. And the next couple are going to be pretty dramatic because they're going to cross the creek. Now, I have no doubt that some of these fictionalized tales that she's telling along the way about the Indians, about the crossing of the creek, and all those kind of things were probably very much based in fact and stories that she heard her parents tell, right? Caroline was a really strong woman, yes, but she came from a family more like Almanzo's. She was, her parents were closer to like Almanzo's parents. She came from money. All right, not huge money, but she came from wealth where dresses were made by a dressmaker, that kind of thing. So it must have been a battle royale throughout their entire marriage a battle of compromises their entire marriage, I bet, until the girls were old enough and moved out. Caroline is a school teacher and her mom is a school teacher. At the time, a school teacher is a way for women to have money. Well, yeah, and the thing was, that's pretty much back in the day, the only thing you had was teaching school or getting married. So that's why most teachers were ugly, right? Or they married real quick in their first couple of years as teachers, right? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's first chapter of Little House on the Prairie, and we will see you next week at 4 o'clock on Saturday, EST, which is Eastern Standard Time, and we will read a chapter or two next, right? All right, take care. God bless. And keep your fingers crossed that the phone comes in soon so that I can take callers and we can actually have an open discussion on the speaker, right? And you have no idea how excited I am for that. All right. I love you guys. Take care. God bless. And we'll see you here next Saturday. Mwah! Love you guys.